it seems like he's really, pardon the pun, but he's really living up to his dog clan name. He just sort of becomes like more and more animalistic, and he's like growling, and he looks like he would be like having his tail tucked between his legs in the cave when Ayla first discovers him.
Yeah.
He's having a every Witcher in a fanfic moment.
Fanfiction tropes are another beast unto themselves.
Someone read a fanfiction and then they wrote Fjall. So
Hey everyone, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morn, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cyrilla of Sintra, across the continent. Thank you so much to everybody who applied to be a guest on the show. If the next seasons are going to be your first time being a guest on the podcast, you're going to hear from me to schedule a brief call in the coming weeks. And fortunately, unfortunately, all of the feelings, the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair, episode 74, will be the last of season 4. After this, we'll be back on Thursday, July 6, 2023, with season 5 of the podcast, covering Andrew Sapkowski's Time of Contempt. In the meantime, keep an eye out on the Breakfast in Beauclair social media channels for a special bonus episode this spring. Thank you as always to our patrons and producer-level patrons, Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Dusant, Jacob B., Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Vangerberg Glamorai, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Wolf, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Silocybe Sorcerer, a Toussaint Knight, Miriam of Temeria, and Softy. While listeners will get an hour-long episode on the feed, this week, in addition to Michelle and Vang's Quiz of Surprise, patrons will also receive the extra hour and a half of recorded content for this episode. In the full 2.5-hour recording, we discuss the Blood Origin finale, ancient elven families, what would have happened if Ayla was the prototype Witcher instead, motherhood as a typical storyline for women, a deep discussion of Meldorf's character arc, what inherited abilities second or third generation Witchers may have if Witchers weren't sterile, Percy Jackson, of course, and whether or not any of the characters consider the power vacuum that's gotta occur at the end of Blood Origin. For just $1 per release, you can get the extended cut of this episode, the paired Quiz of Surprise, and more at patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Michelle from Mexico and Vang from Denmark call in to discuss Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin, episode 103 of Warriors, Wakes, and Wondrous Worlds. Join us as we discuss our episode highlights and critiques, whether or not history is destined to repeat itself, pre-conjunction magic versus chaos magic, how Blood Origin's proto-witcher compares to the contemporary ones of Geralt's time, Scían's secret plan, representations of Irish culture and folklore in the show, and crossover production details from Blood Origin to The Witcher. Plus, stick around till the end of the episode as Michelle and Vang cut onions for me. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin, episode 103 of Warriors, Wakes, and Wondrous Worlds. Hey everyone, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming 2 new members of our Hansa to the show. My first guest is a freelance reader, content creator, and book editor based in Mexico City. Originally from California, she has a background in English and is now developing a second film with her partner at their production house, Kobacha Studios. My second guest is an artist from Denmark who you'll definitely recognize from Witcher Twitter and Witcher Instagram. They currently work at a sustainable culture house and cafe, helping create a community for people in need. Please welcome Michelle from Mexico and Vang from Denmark. Hi, guys.
Hi. That was lovely.
I'm so sorry I made you laugh.
You don't need to apologize for that.
I always get a little intimidated when I realize that people actually watch what I create.
They do, though.
It's well loved. I can assure you,
Yeah.
your work is very well
You
loved.
guys are so sweet. Thank you.
Obviously, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. So excited to have you. And as we usually do with all of our guests, could you tell our community how you both got into The Witcher?
Sure. I first started getting into The Witcher when I was in lockdown in 2020. I had seen some of the billboards around town. I'm like, okay, yeah, another fantasy show, fine. But I started watching it and I'm like, oh, hey, this is actually really cool. This is, it takes a lot of elements from Slavic folklore and traditions that I was interested in because I studied Russian and I fell in love with this sort of gritty atmosphere. And also it didn't take itself too seriously, which I really liked. I then started listening to Peter Kenny's iconic narration of Andrei Sapkowski's The Witcher series. I just need to finish up Season of Storms. Since then, I've also inhaled the Dark Horse Witcher Omnibuy, and I spend just way too much time playing Gwent. I dabble in Witcher cosplay from time to time.
I love cosplays. They're so cool.
It's so much fun. It's something I think I need to do more of.
And Vang, what about you? How did you get into The Witcher?
Oh, well, that is a long time ago by now. I actually started getting into the games, I think, around 2009 when they came out in Europe. The first one, Witcher 1. Back then, I treated it like a dating sim trying to collect romance cards.
A very critical part of the Witcher 1's gameplay, from what I've heard.
It was what got me hooked back then. It was so fun. And looking back at the game, compared to the new ones, it's so wonky and still so well loved.
Yeah.
I know everyone back then was always team Trish or team Yennefer, and I was team Teruviel all the way. That was when my love for the elf started, actually. That was way back.
Oh, that's exciting. And then, of course, I know that you hid your face in your hands when I brought this up in your intro, but you are very prevalent on Witcher Twitter and Witcher Instagram. When you're engaging with the fandom in general, why is that something that's important to you, to just continually create art about the Witcher world and about the elves in general?
Why is it important? Why is it important? That is a big question. Well, because I like it, I guess. And I love other people loving it. I like having the same passion as other people and being able to share it. And I am fortunate that I have learned to draw, which means that I can create something for others and especially be able to create stuff in between seasons where people sometimes leave a fandom. I just love to be able to be part of those people who keep people engaged and entertained.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's a sort of being an entertainer in its own way to be an artist. And I have just enjoyed it, especially this fandom. We have some absolutely amazing people in it. Not just the fans, but actually having the cast and the producers be so interested in what the fans create and how the fans keep the fandoms alive in between seasons. That is something invaluable, at least to me as an artist, to see how much they also have fun with it and enjoy it.
That's actually how I got hooked on the podcast. I was watching the season premiere stream, and Alyssa, your question was selected, and then Laura Smith-Kisrick answered it, and she's like, oh, I'm very familiar with Breakfast in Beauclair, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I should check this out. And so that's where I started following and eventually joined your Hansa.
Same here.
Oh, I know that in and of itself is its own very surreal story, but it's so nice that like both of you were able to find the Breakfast in Beauclair community and the podcast from that as well. Because you both are so lovely.
You too.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that you both found your way here. So today, we'll continue our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin with episode 103 of Warriors, Wakes, and Wondrous Worlds, in which the warriors put a perilous endgame in motion as truths are revealed, passions kindled, and sacrifices made. Here's a quick synopsis of the episode if you need a recap from future Alyssa. In episode 103, our 6 heroes escape the other world and meet Meldorf outside Zintria. Sindril proposes merging himself with the Heart of the Beast to defeat Balor, but Ayla and Fjall insist on taking his place instead. The night before their battle, Fjall reveals that there never was a secret entrance into Zintria. Furious, Scían leaves with his wanted poster. Meldorf and Brother Death bond, Ayla and Fjall's relationship shifts, and Fjall undergoes the trial of the grasses, becoming the first prototype Witcher. In Zintrea, Avallac'h steals Sindril's Book of Monoliths from Balor and brings it to Merwin. Balor attacks Avallac'h in retaliation, but is imprisoned by Eredin and Merwin with his apprentice Fenric. Despite all of their efforts, Avallac'h is unable to open the portal. Merwin returns to Balor for his help, and in exchange, she agrees to release Balor and Fenric. Scían presents herself to Merwin, offering to trade Fjall in exchange for her tribe's sacred blade, Soul Reaver. Scían double-crosses Merwin's soldiers by leading them into an ambush. Now disguised in Zintrean armor, the group and their sellswords make their way to Zintrea. Now that we've gotten a quick recap on what has happened in the episode, I'd love to hear some of your overall thoughts on the episode as well as highlights and lowlights. What did you guys think about the story and the plot, the production, and the casting throughout episode 103?
Well, overall thoughts on episode 3 is that it's a very boiled down episode compared to the other ones. The other episodes had a lot more open world and a lot more traveling, while our characters here are a bit more stagnant, to immediately being picked up by Meldoff and taken to her home. And that is where most of our episodes actually take place. We do have some back and forth where we go back to the palace in Zintrea, but where our main focus in the story is in Meldoff's cave. Even though it's very intense, the actions in the episode, and it's actually the full-on build-up, like we build up to the entire way our first Witcher, it still has a very high intensity, the episode, even though our characters is not traveling or battles or something like that. We only get a bit of battling to the end of the episode. That was the thing I really paid attention to. They had so much going in such a small space, so to speak. It was very intense, the episode. We're fed a lot of information. Like, it's very dense, if you can say it like that, the episode.
I definitely agree. I feel like the idea of having like a night before the big battle episode is so common across television and different series and even scenes in movies as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoy these kinds of slow down moments, and I'm glad that we kind of got them here compared to like the breakneck speed of episodes 1 and 2. We saw this in season 1 of The Witcher main series when we had the mages right before the Battle of Sodden Hill with Yennefer and Triss, Tissaia, Vilgefortz, so on and so forth. So I do kind of enjoy scenes like this when they're kind of musing about the prospect of death and dying and sacrifice.
Right.
It also gives us a chance to meet personalities that has not been introduced yet, such as Meldoff and Brother Death.
Yeah.
It gives us the opportunity to like flesh out their characters. And yeah, Meldorf, I mean, every single episode, someone has said that they love Francesca Mills, and I guess this episode it will be me.
And me.
Yes.
So I fell in love with that character before the show was even out.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's really great because we only saw her in episode 2 interacting on her own and giving her monologues, and finally we get to see her with the rest of the group. And she shines. She always does. She's always an episode highlight for me.
She carries the whole thing. If you gave me the option to have a full-on Meldoff spin-off with her whole revenge quest for Gwen, I would gobble it up in a heartbeat. Netflix,
Hey.
you listen? I want it.
But that's the beauty of Blood Origin is like, while it does feel kind of tidy at the end of the episode, like everything's been resolved, we have all these questions answered that were brought up through the show, and those are done. It does have a lot of room for spin-offs and expansions into the Blood Origin universe. So who knows? Like, maybe you might see something in the pipeline at some point. Netflix, if you're listening, please give us more Meldoff.
So now that we've gone through some of our episode highlights and lowlights and some of the things we've been enjoying Blood Origin, I'd love to get into the discussion questions as well. One of the themes of Blood Origin is really the idea that history repeats itself. Merwin recites this pretty often when speaking about her hero Solrith's conquest of the continent. And in this episode, Meldorf tells the story of that conquest from the dwarven side and recites Assault's brother Death. And I'm really curious to hear from both of you. Do you guys agree with the sentiment that history repeats itself? And what parallels do you think we can draw across the Witcher series and films with this perspective?
It's completely a repeat. Elves arrived on the white ships, took over the continent from the dwarves, hunted them, killed them, mistreated them. And after the conjunctions of the spheres, humans arrived on their ships, and they did exactly what the elves did to the dwarves. It's a complete repeat of history.
At least tying in with the Blood Origin and then the rest of the Witcher lore, I feel like there's sort of a forbidden romance theme going on between Ayla and Fjall. And then with her descendants, or their descendants later on, with Lara Doran and with Cregan of Laud, we see how like these two separate classes of people, two different clans, they get together, they fall in love, and then their progeny sort of has this interesting effect on the rest of the world.
I mean, looking at what Netflix has produced, listeners, if you don't remember, we hear about Lara Doran and Cregan in episode 201, A Grain of Truth, when Nivellen has the little music box that shows the story of Lara Doran. He shows that to Ciri.
The monolith situation also is a repeat. Meldorf, she said, yet again your kind defiles them, which indicates that not only are they misusing the monoliths now, but the previous elf, we have not had confirmed whether or not the Ain Elle is part of the show, but we know that the Ain Shay is, but the previous elves that arrived misused the monoliths too. So now we're having a repeat of that.
You have the elves coming and taking over the dwarven infrastructure and the palace at Sintrea. Sintrea, through the years, becomes Sintria, which then later becomes Sintra. So the humans also reappropriate dwarven/elven palace for their own monarchy.
Yeah, and I think it also begs the question of, like, do you think history repeats itself because it's doomed to repeat itself and we are human or we are flawed inherently? Or do you think it's because it's a matter of being uninformed, as Merwin suggests?
Well, if you take real life, humans have a tendency to repeat themselves as soon as we get far enough away from the first event, because we forget the terrors that happened. Or we're far enough away from them that we have somehow lessened the hurt they have created. Just look at wars. We always rinse and repeat, back to war again, and then we have a long period of peace, well, minor period of peace depending, but then we have a period of peace, and then new generations pop up, and then we forget the hurt. And we start becoming greedy again and entitled again. And then we want something that is not ours, or we are convinced that our beliefs are better than others, and then others should obey said beliefs. And then history then repeats itself.
Yeah. In addition to what you said, like we tend to think that we are better than these people. Oh, these old fogies, like we can do it better than them. A lot of human ego, selfishness, pride,
and lack of emotional engagement in the subject. If you're not emotionally connected to the thing, if it doesn't hurt you or your close bubble, like why should it matter? That's a tendency that humans have to do. We get desensitized when it doesn't involve ourselves and our closest. Every villain finds himself the hero in the end.
Yes. Cue Merwin.
She's convinced that she's the hero in this story. She's convinced that she's doing the best. I also think that is like one of the best written parts of her, is that she is so convinced that what she's doing is the right thing.
Yeah. She's like, I want to civilize these new worlds and bring bounty back to our people. I'm like, isn't that what all colonizers think, though?
Yeah, I mean, she's not so much a villain as she is an antagonist. She has done an insane amount of violence and crime, but it doesn't necessarily inherently, I think, in the context of the story, make her a villain or a big bad in a certain regard.
She doesn't have the criteria for being a big bad evil guy almost. Like, she is the one we're supposed to hate. Same with Balor. But Balor, he is doing the whole thing for revenge. He's doing it self-righteously because he hates the highborns. He is very self-conscious about him being a lowborn, and he feels it is his right to destroy the highborns and become the ruler of all the elves. So there are two very different sides of a coin, like the same coin, villain, but they're like the two opposite reasons why they're doing it.
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess suggests this question of to what extent can intention make an action evil or not, which I think ties into the Witcherverse rather well. Is Merwin less guilty than Balor because she had good intentions, or she wanted to help her people by doing this thing that ultimately causes pain and undoing of the world as they know it? Or is she just as guilty as Balor?
It fits the criteria of what Geralt always talk about, what is the lesser evil, because evil is evil in the end. If it hurts the others. It fits the Witcher universe of how to present the so-called bad guys A lot of them are self-serving, but a lot of them also are completely convinced that they're doing the correct thing for either their loved ones or their country.
We've talked a lot on the podcast about both of those themes, like this idea that everyone is the hero of their own story, as well as the gray morality of the Witcher world. It's a hefty question.
Yeah.
And if you guys at home have any thoughts of it, let us know in the Hansa Discord, because we don't have enough time to unpack morality in this episode. Just to pivot the conversation a little bit, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the magic on the continent. This is actually something that Moretta, Mindy, and I were speculating about in episode 102. And the interesting thing is that between then and now, between their recording and our recording, Netflix To Doom, an official Netflix publication, has shared an article that stated that magic on the continent pre-conjunction was a lot closer to natural, druid-like magic. So my question for you guys is really, how is our understanding of pre-conjunction magic deepened by seeing Zachariah and Sinjil perform this proto-Trial of the Grasses? And conversely, is there anything that's really added to the conversation about chaos magic when we look at Balor's interest in it versus what we know about it from Tissaya's teachings and from Yennefer's continual displays of chaos magic?
So I think it's kind of interesting when we see this sort of druidic-inspired magic. When we see the spells being chanted over Fjall, we see this kind of vine-like presence inject from the monster's heart and into Fjall's body at various points. So they're kind of acting as IV tubes, I guess, and sort of transferring this DNA over into Fjall. It feels a lot more organic, a lot more of fusing with nature. It feels a little bit more harmonious, even though it's a kind of violent action we're witnessing. Whereas with Balor, I think it's sort of a Volethmir tie-in with season 2 with the little orb that Balor is asking for this magic.
I noticed the fact that magic didn't demand anything in order to be used before chaos became a part of the continent. Mm-hmm. If you look at any sort of magic being used, being it Balor and Avalak's telekinesis, or the fact that Balor is capable of heating metal, or that the fact that he can threaten a person to be turned inside out, basically. Just the levitation of the rocks now demands the sacrifice of the flower, which it simply didn't do before the conjunction of the spheres. You were capable of using magic as kind of a shift in energy, like it was like a flow and an exchange, like they lived in harmony with that energy. But since chaos came in, it's kind of like a pollution. Funny thing is, if you look at the magic that Francesca uses, she's still colored by the druid magic with her ability to make flowers grow without a sacrifice. And even Fringilla make note of it and goes like, wow, how do you do that? Because she has never seen that type of spell before. So I think that she might still actually be capable. She is, of course, polluted by the chaos magic, but she still have this connection to the original magic of the world that other mages simply don't.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question as well, is if we do see these two different types of magic, where do you think this druidic magic has gone? Or do you think it kind of still exists in pockets? And it sounds like, Vang, you feel that the elves of Geralt's time period may still have access to that through their history with the continent, whereas for humans, they were able to acquire magic through unnatural, I'll put quotes on that, unnatural means.
That's how it comes off to me, especially when we're introduced to Francesca's magic as something that other mages haven't experienced before.
We've spoken about the magic, and I think it's an appropriate time to talk about the effects of that as well, and specifically about Fjall. Michelle, you had a question about this. How is Fjall, as the first Witcher, similar to or different from modern Witchers that we know? So characters like Geralt, Lambert, Eskel, Cohen, Vesemir even. What do you guys think are some of the differences that we see with Fjall's prototype Witcher?
It seems like Fjall doesn't really need any additional potions than the ones that he received in the Trial of the Grasses in order to activate his sort of Witcher mode. And he can't control them.
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting character arc for him because throughout the show, he's been sort of chided for not being able to control his passions, get himself together, bury his feelings down and continue and soldier on. When he's finally transformed into the prototype Witcher, that's all gone. He's struggling so hard to control himself, but it's bleeding through. His passions are bleeding through to the point where they take him over completely by episode 4. If you want to add lore reasons for why this is such a different approach to a Witcher than what we see in Geralt's time, where it's a stereotype even that, Witchers are non-feeling beings or monsters. Maybe the mages saw this example in Fjall and they're like, whoa, we need to kind of recalibrate the formula a little bit, guys. Let's maybe not have this uncontrolled passion arise from a Witcher with incredible strength and power and killing ability. They need to be able to control it and take additional potions to heighten certain senses or abilities if necessary in conjunction with oils.
I like the way that you framed that because it really points out how his overall character arc is really a tragedy. It just continually doubles down on things that he struggles with to the point that he's eventually consumed by them. As opposed to Ayla, who eventually finds peace with all of the things that she had experienced previously in her life, Fjall is just continually confronted with his own shortcomings in his inability to control himself. And I wonder if it's also that question of when these trials happen, does it just amplify things that he's already experienced or things that he's already feeling? Is it just more of Fjall, which also means more of his strength as a warrior? Sure, that was the reason why Ayla and Fjall wanted to put themselves forward instead of Sindral, who is a mage. They wanted someone who already knew how to fight, who was already a capable warrior. But does it also amplify his flaws as well?
I think that's an interesting point because oftentimes a person's strength is also, on the flip side, one of their weaknesses. So maybe someone who's extremely kind can also be too kind and let people walk all over them. So I think in Fjall's case, his passion is something that is a strength in that he's able to care for Ayla and use that as a motivation for himself to destroy the beast in episode 4. However, it also gets him into a lot of problems that he regrets and he doesn't want to do them. So I think with the monster DNA, it sort of corrupts that. The beast-like tendencies or monstrous tendencies that he may have suppressed as a human and as having that judgment and restraint before, that's just been removed.
Yeah, I feel like the qualities of that angler centipede thing, I don't think self-control is probably one of them.
Unlikely.
Yeah, so I can't imagine that would be added to Fjall's character in any way. A lot of the episode is really focused on Fjall's transformation and this proto-witcher and the trial of the grasses. But we have another B storyline that happens over the course of this episode, specifically around Scían. And she goes through this whole journey. We believe she's going to betray Ayla and everybody else. She goes to Merwin and negotiates for the bounty on Fjall and Ayla. Eventually comes back to the group and we discover that she two-timed everybody by eventually leading Merwin's troops into a trap. So they now have their sellswords and they're way into Sintra. But when we look at this storyline as a whole, what do you guys think that it tells us about Scían's character or her position within the group itself?
To me, it shows me that even though Scían has loyalty to the group, she does not trust their judgment in her. She didn't feel trusted enough to tell them the truth and have them let her do the necessary thing to do. Because the only reason I can see why Scían would not tell the group what she was doing is because she would be anticipating them trying to stop her. Despite her having this amount of loyalty she has and experience as a sellsword, and she knows how to work with people, she sometimes would have to double time them and take risks, she is somehow anticipating the group not to take her advice for good. So it's kind of obvious that Scían is aware she is not the leader of the group, but is experienced enough that she should have been, and therefore takes the role temporarily on her own.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also just due to her maturity as an elf and also as a military mind. So, she asks Fjall, hey, tell me more about this secret entrance into the palace you mentioned in episode 1. And he's getting drunk from the wake. And he's like, well, actually, there is no secret entrance. I just told you that. And she's like, every time I think I'm done with fools, another one drops in front of me, which I love. I'm going to use that for so many things. I want to embroider that and hang it up on a wall somewhere. So she, I think, as you were saying, Vang, has to take the reins, figuring out like, great, I have to figure everything out again. And having been the last member of her tribe, she's had to be independent for a very long time. She's had to think for herself. Even though she's made friends with other sellswords, she can't really completely trust them because they're all kind of in competition. So I think if it did cross her mind to tell them, she very quickly eliminated that as like, no, this is not a tactically good idea. If I tell them, hey guys, I'm gonna do a triple cross on ya, they're gonna be like, no, like, or they're gonna be terrible actors about it, maybe.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, we've been betrayed. But you see the real sense of betrayal, and they're like, what are you doing, Scían? What's going on? Why are you going? Oh no, what's going on? So she sells that effect much better by not saying anything, and it has the effect of heightening the drama for the audience, as well as being a callback to in episode 1, where Fjall and Ayla are having this discussion of like, can we trust her? Ayla's saying, she's all I've got, and Fjall says something to the effect of like, she'll sell you the first chance she gets. She'll turn on you. So it kind of plays with that expectation in the audience's mind, like, of course, like we've heard about this in episode 1, we've had doubts about her a little bit, and now we're like, oh, maybe this is true. And then we're like, oh, I guess it wasn't. I just would have preferred it to be stretched out a little bit further, have a little bit more time to let it breathe and percolate and add more drama to it.
That was the thing I had noted down, actually, because it feels to me like this was a part of the storyline that was supposed to have been longer. If this was supposed to have stretched over maybe 2.5, 3 episodes, this would have had a bigger impact, at least on me as a viewer, because I, as a viewer, didn't believe she was double-crossing the team. Well, again, because of stereotypes and how we watch movies as the viewer, but because she had been represented as this very loyal character, and it wouldn't make sense. It would go against a lot of the personalities she had been representing so far. So for me, I was like, she's doing a double thing. And she was doing a double thing. So to me, it didn't come as a surprise. I was anticipating it a bit. But had they drawn it out longer and made me doubt it a bit more, be like, oh, she's pulling this a bit far now, to me, it would have had a bigger impact.
Yeah, I think for me, Scían fits this very parental role within the group. I think that's, of course, partially because of her age. As you said, her maturity is an elf, Michelle. But I think also the fact that she is like a sword mother and a protector and a mentor to not just Ayla, but to everybody at a certain point. And that's due to obviously her experience, her prowess as a warrior, and her perspective. What the betrayal tells us about her is kind of her ability to pivot, plan ahead. As you said, Vang, she's clearly been on her own for a very long time, and she's learned how to be nimble and independent. It teaches us that she's incredibly calculating and knows how to work every side of the room. There's no way that anyone else probably could have gotten in without a fight. So it's just very impressive that she's able to sell that, not just as Michelle Yeoh, but as Scían. Admittedly, when I do watch any of these series for the first time, especially like as a creator, like I know I'm gonna have to like quote unquote do work on it or take notes, all that stuff later. I turn my brain so far off when I watch for the first time.
Yeah.
When I'm watching any of these shows, and I was in it. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe she's betraying everybody. But I do agree, like I wish that it really had been drawn out a little further because it confuses the stakes, I think, to have all of these plot lines resolved so quickly. I think, Michelle, you had mentioned earlier that by the end of episode 3, most of the questions that we've had so far are pretty neatly wrapped before we head into the finale. As with like the transformation and a number of other plot points, it would have been really nice to just kind of like milk this a little bit longer. So we really kind of buy into the premise that this will have consequences on either side because it's resolved within like 5 minutes.
It had a bit of a fillingless pie moment, so to speak.
Yeah, I wonder if it would have been more interesting to have the episode end when she kind of flashes her swords and you hear everybody go hup, and then just poof, the episode ends.
You're like, oh no.
I needed more meat on those bones, so to speak. It just needed just a bit more, but it was good. It was good.
And I guess, like, as we've been talking about possible influences for the series, I'd love to jump into specifically the Irish and Celtic culture as well. We do know that the showrunner Declan DeBarra is Irish, as are a couple of the actors. Michelle, this is a question that you posed to Vang. What elements of Irish or Celtic culture, heritage, or folklore do we see in Blood Origin?
That is a big question to give me. It's not like I had a lot of time to do my research. The first thing the elves, for example, reminded me of was the Native Americans. And then I was told that they're also a representation of the Irish and they're also a representation of the Jews. And I was like, I can see all the parallels in this. And it's written so well because the parallel is not a sharp line, it's not a fine box here. It was created for us to draw a parallel to that marginalized group we could remember in our generation. Balor, actually, I get what people say that they have compared him to Balor of the Irish folklore. He is a giant represented with a third eye, which makes so good sense with the staff looking like a big ass eyeball. Huh. He has an evil third eye, and it can either be described as the venomous eye or an eye that, like, it basically shoots a laser beam almost.
Wow.
He is compared to the heat of the sun, which is so cool because that reminds me of the whole fire magic that he is the first to harness.
Oh, that's so interesting.
I see the overlaps where people is like, oh, I can like compare him to Balor of the Irish folklore because he does have the fire and he does have the third eye kind of thing. I can see some of it. There's just bits and pieces, of course, that's missed. It's like very cherry picked because he doesn't kill his grandson in Blood Origin.
Well, he kills some kids, like
lots of children and innocents in general.
Speaking of the names in the show, I noticed they have a lot of Irish names and they have a lot of Icelandic names / Nordic. I would say like Fjall, for example. That is some overlap, definitely to Nordic with the Icelandic. But if you look at Ailith's sister, who is named Neve, I was excited when I heard that name. I was like, yes, we just need an Aoife now then.
It is pretty. They got close with Ayla, though. I think that's also an actual name in Ireland.
Yeah, very pretty names they chose. The name of the storyteller is Shenachie. It's Irish, or it's Gaelic, which means that it overlaps in Scottish and in Irish, and it's Shenachie. Well, as good as I can do it, because I am just learning Irish, so please excuse my pronunciations.
Oh, no, that's okay. I don't think any of us here are fluent Irish speakers or Irish Gaelic speakers at all.
Not me calling her Seancha.
But you wouldn't know because it's Shenachie.
I don't think I can accurately replicate those noises with my face.
My friend from Scotland, Seeley, was saying it's Shenachie in Scottish, and I can see that 2 of the dialects in Irish have Shenachie, and I think the last one is Shenchre or something like that. I didn't pay too much attention, but yeah, it depends on dialects and stuff. I think it means the old man / old woman, which is another word for storyteller.
I wasn't sure if it was a proper noun or not, like at the time, because whenever they referred to Minnie Driver, it was by that name. In interviews exclusively, though. Like they hadn't actually said anything during Blood Origin itself.
Right.
So you were only getting that from the end credits and from interviews with Declan DeBarra.
Something that really caught my eye throughout the Blood Origin universe is that there's a lot of really nice handmade details, or at least it looks handmade on screen to me. I spend a lot of time embroidering and sewing, and so that's something I kind of look for is costume design. Like noticing on Scían's robe, it looks like to me they used sashiko embroidery, possibly hand done, because freezing some frames and also looking at some like screenshots online, I was able to kind of zoom in a little bit, and I'm seeing that some of the stitches are not quite the same size, and there's also a doubling of the thread where they're securing a new thread. So I'm like, okay, it's possible someone made this by hand, maybe they got this used or they commissioned it.
They have an overlap with the background, by the way, too. From the show to Blood Origin, when you speak about details, if you look at a little inn they sit in, if you look at the pillars behind the characters, you will recognize the same type of design from Francesca's tent in season 2.
Oh,
that's a nice detail.
That's really cool. I didn't notice that. I have to go back and look at it now.
I noticed it because I was cheeky enough to paint myself a tray for my kitchen with the patterns from Francesca's tent. Don't take my word for it, but I think it's I think Norway used to do it, and I think some Slavic countries used to do it, where they would, and still do, some places where they paint flower patterns along doorways and panels. And that is kind of the thing I have noticed they do with at least the lowborn elves tend to decorate.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of details, by the way, have you guys paid attention to the fact that Meldov's hammer, Gwen, has an eye so she can see who she punches in the face?
Yes, it was so cute.
I love she gave her an eye so she can see who she's hitting.
Vengeance has never been so fun and adorable. I'm like, oh, Meldov, you're so fun. Can you come to all my parties?
Meldov's storyline with Gwen is heartbreaking.
Tragic.
Gotta admit, I ugly sobbed through the entire thing of her telling the story. No, I could not contain it. I was absolutely bawling my eyes out when I watched it. That was so well acted and so soft. The little moment afterwards where Ailey starts to sing the echo on the river, and we have Meldov look over at Brother Death and Sakare, and they hug, and she she picks up Gwen so she can cuddle Gwen too.
It broke my heart.
Aww.
That moment ruined me. Just that little detail of her realizing she should probably have Gwen snuggle up too and watch. That killed me, but in such a good way.
So as we start closing down our conversation, do you guys happen to have any final thoughts on this episode of The Witcher Blood Origin, 103 of Warriors, Wakes, and Wondrous Worlds?
I liked it. I liked it very much. It was well contained. It had some good filling to it, if you know what I mean. Even though it wasn't as high paced as the other episodes, I very much enjoyed the in-depth we got to go with some of the characters' personalities. We got to see some of their core values really shine through. We got to experience the love that Brother Death has for Sakare, and the appreciation he has for her, and how she views him, and how that taught him to view himself, and Meldov's love for Gwen, and her feeling lost now and not actually having a purpose, and therefore taking a purpose by joining the group. And we have the Ailey and we have Fjall's lovemaking and coming together as a couple suddenly after all the struggles they've been through. It's huge things, like huge character developments put into one episode. Even when we look at Balor's realization in the cell that it is Fenric he will have to kill. We're reaching some very big peaks in this episode. That is what I very much appreciate about it, because it didn't feel rushed, yet we still got to have some really big moments.
I would say for like a series sort of comment, like some of the gaps maybe in maybe character development or plot explanation, if you kind of look at it as like an epic folk tale or part of like an epic poem, it does kind of follow a similar outline, a similar sort of exposition of like these characters stay this way throughout the series and we see their epic deeds and here's the tale of what they did. I don't know if that was a conscious choice of the filmmakers, but you do hear Balor through several points being like, well, this is an epic folk tale in the making and that's a story people can latch onto.
Yeah.
This is also an orally passed on tale to Jaskier to inspire the Scoia'tael in his time to, rise up and start a revolution and continue on with the good cause. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to see it that way, but if you sort of look at it through the lens of like, okay, this is kind of like a modern folktale, then it's a little easier to forgive some of the miscomings, but also tying in with the theme of stories and the power of songs and stories to motivate a grassroots revolution, for good or ill, I think also ties into in season 1, I think episode 2, where Jaskier is composing the famous, toss a coin to your witcher, and he's like, respect doesn't make history. And there's kind of like a warning behind there, like, hey, be careful of the stories that you are listening to, that you're being told, because they're not always truthful. So there's a way that this is used in a positive light to motivate the people, to motivate the elves to reclaim what is theirs and to take back the land for the lowborns, at least momentarily, before the humans kind of destroy everything. For this episode, I thought it was interesting to see this sort of contrast of sacrifice for love and sacrifice for personal gain. One is out of a desire to protect, and the other one is a desire to gain power. And yes, the actions may be similar, but the result is very different. And I think it was nice to see, like, some people may say that, well, Fjall and Ayla kind of have this rushed romance, but also one that also happens a lot in folktales.
It does. It really
like,
does.
I saw you across the street at a market. I'm in love.
I just solved this riddle. Now give me the princess.
I don't know your name. I haven't heard you speak. I don't care.
All of these are terrible bases for marriage, by the way.
Give me half the kingdom and a princess. I'm good. I kissed a frog. Like,
but it was nice to see them connect. Like they've kind of been opening up to each other. They've been coming a little bit more at ease around each other because they think they see in each other a version of themselves. Because they're both from very similar backgrounds. They both had similar childhoods, probably. Like, they're both chosen to be warriors for their clan, to hate the other clans, and to protect their monarch. And now that's all gone, and all they really have is each other and other members of the group. But I think they sort of see in each other, understanding that they can't necessarily find in anyone else at this point. Not really. So it was nice to sort of see them have a moment together before episode 4 starts and all that entails.
Yeah, I do agree. Like, this episode, I think, as I said previously, just felt like a breath from the breakneck speed that we had in episodes 1 and 2, what we're going to see in episode 4. There is a lot of vulnerability that happens and that is revealed throughout the course of this episode. As we said, the shift in Fjall and Ayla's relationship, we have a lot of time getting to know Meldorf and Brother Death as they get to know each other. Even with Merwin showing her vulnerability toward Balor, Eridan, and Avalok, even if it is obviously coming from a place of begrudging need. Right. So I feel like this is a very large exploration of their characters, I think, as much as we can get within this 4-episode series. This has been our place to do that. And I would agree, like, I kind of wish we got more of the campfire scenes. We got more of an opportunity to get to know them throughout the whole series. But I think at least we have that chance here in episode 3. So overall, I enjoyed it. Would have loved to see more of that communication, more of these scenes and these vulnerabilities, and additional character development. But, you know, it is what it is. And I'm glad we got to explore all of that together and chat about it here.
That's probably the main issue I have with the show on a negative side, is that while I agree it's better to leave the audience wanting more than to give too much, and Declan DeBarra had mentioned that he didn't want to have it stretch out too much and have the effect on the viewer of like, oh my god, when is this going to end? It does feel very punchy. It feels very well, like a punch to the face, as he said he wanted to make it feel. It does feel like that. I feel like there's so much going on. You don't have time to get bored at all. It's like you're either on or you're out. And it's like you just have to jump aboard the Blood Origin train and hang on for dear life for all of this stuff that's happening and coming at you. And I really like it. But I wish they kept in a few of those scenes that Laura Smith-Histrich had mentioned that they cut for, you know, those 2 episodes that she said were like these beautiful scenes of like talking around a campfire. I'm like, that sounds like a really nice time to me. I would have liked to see more of that.
Yeah.
See a little bit more of the deepening of these characters, of their affection for each other. And, you know, play up the emotional connection that the audience has before it takes a tragic turn in the 4th episode.
The thing he managed to do with this season of Blood Origin, like this sort of one-shot we're getting, is that he managed, and I love that actually, it's a big praise because it gives me a great deal of nostalgia. It gave off the vibe of fantasy movies we grew up with, the pacing, the themes. It had that kind of early 2000 to the, you know what I mean, that kind of fantasy genre we grew up with. Like, it had a bit of Lord of the Rings too. It had that pacing going for it. It reminded me of that old Dungeons and Dragons movie. It had some of you remember it, right?
Yeah.
It just had that pacing, is what I'm saying. It had just enough meat to get us sucked into the world and understand enough of the lore for us to not get confused about what was going on.
Yeah.
It was really good. I really liked how they spread this out. I will say I would have loved 1 episode more, maybe just a bit longer episodes, just to There were some crumbs that I missed here and there, but overall, watching this show was like watching a really good, very long movie.
And that's what he wanted it to feel like as well. I don't know what you two think, but I don't know. For me, I think it does fill in a lot of lore gaps that exist from before the conjunction of the spheres up to the conjunction of the spheres, where Sapkowski didn't feel the need to expand upon that more than just a couple of nuanced allusions to it in the books. And I think from that perspective, I'm like, oh, it does answer these questions that I had as a reader of, well, what did this look like? How was their society like pre-agrarian, but also scientifically and artistically advanced? And it does feel like it could be the same places that The Witcher takes place in a very long time apart from the events of the main show, to me at least.
I think my problem was, now we're talking about how they said this is how the Elven society was supposed to be, was according to us. I as an elf fan, a very loud, outspoken elf fan, I arrived at the show with expectations. That said, it has been very obvious I have enjoyed the show. I have very much enjoyed this show, but I do have some criticism. And that is an artistic choice. I have full respect for them choosing how they're designing backgrounds, the clothing. I do love the highborn clothings. I think it's gorgeous wardrobe. Absolutely. It's amazing. I do have a bit of criticism looking at the, how can you say, the lowborn elves fashion versus the fashion in The Witcher, because you can't tell me that in 1200 years fashion haven't changed. And that is a thing, as a person who loves history and especially fashion history myself, like I do enjoy that a lot. I think it's such an interesting topic. You can't tell me that peasant clothes does not change in 1200 years. The design, the cut, the color palette, it's the same thing. There's limits to, of course, what you can do. You know what I mean? I am not being I'm not trying to be unrealistic, but I would have liked a sharper contrast, especially at so close to the Elven Golden Era.
Yeah.
I would have liked a richer society, even in the poor parts of the Elven culture. I would have liked a richer society, even amongst the poor. I was not a personal fan of the choice to make the set look like a mix between Dune and Star Wars. I would have very much appreciated in that setting to have been a little closer to the books, especially since Tarkovsky wrote it out so specifically. He was very specific in the designs with the marble stairs and the archways and the pillars and the colorful gravel and mosaic floors and terracotta decorations and carving in the walls and these very elaborate, beautiful buildings with big plains of grass and flower beds and aqueducts and rivers and like bridges over the. It was very specific, the design. It has a sort of design mix between, I guess, Mediterranean, something along those lines. That I missed. As an elf fan, who's a very outspoken elf fan, I kind of missed that because that is things that I loved in the books. That is things that, of course, got stuck in my head. The fashion type, the design overall, like the architecture. I love those kinds of details in the books. But I do appreciate what they tried to do with this. I do, because they wanted them to differentiate so much from the human architecture as possible. They wanted a really big part between those two. And they achieved it very much so.
The interesting thing I think about Blood Origin and about all the spin-offs that Netflix is doing is that obviously there's a difference in literature versus, film and television. But I think part of the reason why Sapkowski's writing style works is because he writes very little when it comes to like the worlds and the lore, but it's something that's very specific to him and the way that he's, has built up this kind of half-baked universe in that it supports the plot. So I feel like that's both an opportunity but also a huge challenge for Netflix. Because obviously the opportunity for new stories comes in the cracks of where Sapkowski has left out bits of the lore, bits of history, which he did all over the books. At the same time, there's obviously criticism or skepticism when these new stories conflict with things that we've already heard in either the canon or for some people in the games or the series. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at Netflix's opportunity and the decision to pursue all of these outside of the main series, just because it's now, we started talking about the magic system and we've started to flesh it out. And because we've made that decision, now we have to explain it. Whereas Sapkowski never even really explored that.
Yeah.
So they're kind of almost needing to answer questions that they themselves have brought up. And it's not necessarily a task that I very much envy. It is a symptom of having decided to pursue this.
Right.
And I think part of that is when it comes to the elves and the elven architecture, as we were talking about in the production there. I've been kind of formulating this, and I might speak about it more in episode 104, or, hell, I'll leave it here. We'll figure it out. But I almost feel that in that idea that not enough about elven society has changed over the course of 1,200 years between Blood Origin and the main series, I would have kind of liked to see a stronger shift in certain aspects of the production as well. And I think for me, it's like if we're equating, again, this is not a direct one-to-one because of spoiler, but if we were equating like Geralt's contemporary times to our world,
Mm-hmm.
it would be medieval, like medieval adjacent.
Right.
So for me, 1,200 years to that is essentially somewhere between like a couple hundred BC to a couple hundred AD.
Mm-hmm.
Like somewhere for me within the Greco-Roman period.
We just have to remember elf were higher in technology than
Yes.
humans. Like they were a more evolved society.
But that is a valid point. I think that it would have just been a stronger starting reference for a lot of the production aspects, things like costuming, sets, that sort of thing, to start from an even further historical reference point because it still feels a little too medieval in certain regards.
It felt like going from medieval times to medieval times.
Exactly. So I would have loved to see like a much, much stronger shift. Obviously, there's a fantastical element to it. There's a technological element to it, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at least having like the starting point of it feels inherently different and then expanding upon that would have positioned that difference in a much stronger contrast if we could really feel that 1,200 years, not just in terms of the way that people behaved, but in the way that everything looks. And arguably, there was very little difference in the way that everybody behaved between Blood Origin and the main series.
Yeah, there was a huge overlap in the human behavior and the elven behavior. I didn't see any societal differences that would make elves despise humans as much as they do because they're so different, because they're the same completely, actually. So I would have loved a cultural difference in this show, a much bigger cultural difference.
So that is it for our show today. Michelle, Vang, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. So where can people find you both, and is there anything that our community can do for you or anything that you would like to share with them?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram under the name Vangberg1 with a number, and that is just it. If you enjoy Elven or in general fan content and sometimes a rare original character once in a while, you can come join me there.
So you can find me on Instagram at Michelle M. Morley. That's Michelle with 2 L's, M, and then Morley. As far as things I'm working on, my studio that I started is working on its next film. I can't say much about it except that it's animated.
Exciting.
Yeah, so I'm always hustling. I'm always looking for work. So, if you have anything at all, any questions, or you want me to check something, or want to run something by me, or you have me in mind for something that you think I might fit in with, send me a DM and we'll chat.
10 out of 10 can say that both Vang and Michelle are very, very good at what they do.
Thank you.
So I both illustration as well as I rely on Michelle for a lot of proofreading for me sometimes.
Thank you.
This is such a sweetheart.
No, I'm so excited. Can I just say I'm so excited that I got to be on the podcast.
It has been
this
so
has been
fun.
So much fun.
It's really been fun. I've really enjoyed talking with you guys, and sharing your interest and passion in this. It's just been so much fun to bounce with you.
Yes.
So thank you so much for having me. It's been really fun.
I still can't believe I'm on this podcast.
Well, I hope it's not your last time for either of you. We still have lots of things to look forward to. Yes.
I would love to come back.
I did sign up for season 3, if you noticed.
I did see you guys sign up for stuff. So I'm excited to have you on either season 5 or season 6 of Breakfast in Beauclair. So yeah, so that's it. And next episode, join us as we conclude our community discussions of the Witcher Blood Origin with episode 104 of Mages, Malice, and Monstrous Mayhem.
I'm actually sore. I've been enjoying myself so much. You guys are such good fun talking with. I have really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I feel the same. This has been so much fun.
I love bouncing ideas with you guys and hearing how we're having different takes and same takes. And it's just been so fun just overall, like hearing you guys' opinions and experiences. It's just been great. You're doing great, Alyssa.
Aw, thanks.
You are. No, but you are. You need the praise.
Yes.
You're doing amazing. You're doing awesome. And we're so proud of you for having this podcast and how far you've gotten. You're doing so great. We're so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yes.
We are. We're so proud of you. You put so much love and effort into this, and it just shows. It just shows. You're doing so good.
And I think it's also important, like you've been connecting point for other people in the Witcherverse discourse, and you've been really great about fostering a really positive community around this beloved IP that, you know, I really love.
Yeah, she's such a good soul.
Yeah. I'm like, we need more Alyssas.
I'm like, oh my God, this is all going to be recorded and now I'm tearing.
No, but we just want you to know you're so appreciated, Alyssa. You're doing so well and you're doing so much. And we just want you to know that we see it. Okay? Like, we just want you to know that we actually see and appreciate all the effort and dedication and love you put into this.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. It's one of those things that, like, it's nice to hear every once in a while.
And you deserve to hear it.
Oh,
you do. No, but you do.
Of course.
You do deserve to be told that you're doing a good job because we really think you are.
Thank you guys so much. That's very sweet. And now I have a video of me freaking out. So.
You took it so well, though. No, I hate getting praised too. I don't hate it. I just don't know how to react to it, so I just get all awkward. Like,
Thanks for joining us at the breakfast table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morn. It's hosted by Alyssa with the tidings from Toussaint, news segment by Alyssa Mudgerflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music from Filter Media. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Ava of Gulleby, Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Bangor, Glamour, Red Kate, the Original Roach, Cotter's Cat, Libby, Wolf, John of Ripley, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Sally Sipe Sorcerer, Toussaint Knight, Mary from Mary, and Softy. Special thanks to Michelle and Vang for joining us for this episode and our international Hansa for their support.